entry-level positions dying? It's something I've been asking myself for a while now, and something I've been discussing with colleagues, and we haven't really reached a consensus. But it's undeniable that the industry is changing, both film industry and video game industry, but film and TV a lot more so, because they are older mediums that have not quite yet adapted to the modern times, and they're kind of having a hard time. This isn't going to be some think piece about AI, because frankly, I don't think I'm qualified to talk about that. I don't work in that industry, and I don't really know what's happening behind closed doors there. So I don't really feel comfortable giving my opinion on any of that, because I genuinely don't know. But this doesn't necessarily just have something to do with smart tools and AI. It's something that started before the pandemic, I want to say. See, when I came to Los Angeles, there were all these composer studio compounds that were like bustling office spaces where people from all kinds of departments would go in and out. There would be recording sessions. There would be busy composers, assistants, interns. It was a whole system. You would work together, and there would be, next to recording sessions, also mixing sessions and stuff like that. You'd have lunch and dinner together, you would have drinks together, you would have Christmas parties together. It would very much be like a traditional office space in that sense, with lots of learning opportunities by looking other people over the shoulder. For example, I would, in those types of spaces, very often, if there was a mixing session going on, I would, sit down and just ask them if I can watch for a bit and ask questions, or I would ask my colleagues, hey, could you, when you go home tonight, leave your doors unlocked? I'll lock them when I leave. I'd just love to look at your templates because I'm struggling with something over here and I'd love to see how you're doing it. You would just help each other out and fill in each other's knowledge and skill gaps. But already pre-pandemic, I want to say 2016, 2017, I noticed a shift that was happening where a lot of those compounds and a lot of those larger studios where a lot of different composers were renting out spaces were largely filled with assistants and interns, while the lead composer would work elsewhere and just come in for sessions or for important meetings and such. So this already kind of limited the learning opportunities, but it was still there. You just got less face-to-face time with your boss. But then during the pandemic, a lot of composers could not go into those spaces. Their assistants could not go into those spaces because office spaces were closed. And so they had no choice but to build their home studios. And they built really nice home studios. And obviously they saw all the benefits of work from home that we all saw. So now they would either have their team on their own premises at home, or they would still keep an outside space for just, one or two people to work from, because film studios have regulations about security. If you don't work directly on the film studio lot, but you work from an outside third-party space, it has to have certain security. So some composers working on the really big stuff, they would still keep, an outside space for their assistants to work from, but not a lot of them, because studio rent is really expensive in LA. People are paying thousands per month for a small, dark room. And so they realized, you know what, we could build something way cheaper somewhere else and subsidize a different workspace, and then we don't have to pay for this really expensive space just because it's in a compound that is, treated and that has all these other amenities. We could just have that elsewhere for cheap, because a lot of those composer studios have massive overhead. So this would reduce the overhead by quite a lot, and it would be more convenient for everybody. But as a result, a lot of those formerly bustling composer compounds have been left pretty dead at this point. But with composers working more and more from home, they've also become a little pickier about who they hire and who they let in, because effectively you're now visiting the composer's home. So there has to be a basis of trust. But what I also think is that the pandemic has sped up the development of automation tools, smart tools, AI tools that now make a lot of tasks for assistants obsolete. For example, stem printing. On older setups, it used to be that Cubase would be hardwired into Pro Tools, and it would be a completely different rig, and then you would print stems in real time directly into Pro Tools. It was a really slow process. There was a reason for it. I mean, computer processing power, sample libraries, offline bouncing not being reliable at the time. But this was 15, 20 years ago. I was still doing it for some composers that still had this old setup, but modern composers don't do that anymore. At this point, offline bouncing is very reliable, and you don't have to have a separate computer playing back picture anymore and all this stuff. It's just not necessary with the kinds of computers that we have available. So now a job that used to take, say, a week, or where multiple people would have to do shift work to print stems around the clock, that same process now takes at best a day, if not less. Another example is copyist work. It used to be, back in the day, you needed a ton of people to hand copy parts. Then software already came in and is writing the parts in the background. So now you just need people, double checking the page breaks and transpositions and stuff like that. But we're just one step away from there being a tool that does that automatically. I mean, it's not going to be that hard to make that little jump. And then copyists will become obsolete. It's already a lot less than it used to be. I mean, you used to need way more people and way more time. Now you can do it with one person in a day or two. The same goes for librarians, for example. We already had the first sessions where the players were using iPads or other tablets, which makes page turns way easier because you don't have to physically turn a page, you just swipe. But also, if the conductor or composer want to make any changes, they can do it right in the score, and then it automatically appears in all the parts in real time. So that's gonna be the process in the future, which means all the printing and librarian work, the taping, the making the books and doing all that, printing on physical medium, it's gonna go away. But so overall, you just need less people in a lot of areas already to do the same amount of work. Likewise, when I got into town, I don't think Uber and Lyft were a thing, and all those delivery services weren't a thing. So a lot of studios still had interns and runners to run errands. But now, especially again accelerated by the pandemic, we have so many apps that can deliver food. You can order things overnight that you need for the studio. There isn't really a need for runners anymore. It's actually more expensive to have someone, to pay someone full time to run errands for you and do menial tasks than it is to just use an app and just pay for the service when you need it. What I'm seeing is that a lot of the entry-level tasks are going away, and with it, entry-level positions. I've just checked in with a bunch of places that had regular internships going that would just, rotate interns every 6 weeks or every 3 months. I just checked in, and they all said after the pandemic, they never started those internships back up because it's a time suck for the studio and kind of a waste. If you don't need the people, I mean, what are you going to do? Just have them sit around? It's kind of, they just didn't see the need to have that again. And so they just never started any of those internships back up. Also remember that budgets aren't necessarily getting higher. So the amount of full-time positions is already dwindling. Most working film composers live in expensive areas like Los Angeles and London. And here in LA, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is, I think at this point, $2,000 a month, plus utilities, plus food, plus everything. That's quite a lot of money. So if you want a full-time assistant with rising living costs, and you want to compensate them appropriately, that's a pretty big chunk of money. So there's a very small amount of composers that can still justify having full-time salaried employees that are there all year round and that are on payroll. What you have a lot more these days are part-time freelance assistants that are hired on a per-project basis. But in general, things are looking pretty dire because first we had the pandemic, slowing things down, then things started picking up again, then we had massive strikes last year, and to this day, things have not really picked up again. Add to that all the video game layoffs and cancellations, and then you have a lot of established composers who still might have work, but who don't have so much work that they need full-time assistants. Now, has remote work gotten more popular? A little bit, mostly for trusted team members, because we handle a lot of sensitive information, so a lot of composers won't just willy-nilly hire remote workers in other locations or hire people they don't know. But if it's a trusted long-term team member, then yes, there might be a lot more leeway for remote work. But you definitely need trust. You need to know that the person who is receiving files, sending files, storing files, especially picture files, is responsible and they know how to do things, they know how to be secure. So that is usually reserved for people that you already know. Now, if you're a tech or someone else who does something that needs to be done on the premises, then of course remote work is not really an option. But I also have to say that there aren't that many composers that need a full-time tech on site. First of all, because a lot of them have given up their outside spaces, but also because the more modern, younger composers have really streamlined their setups. They have simplified things, and they're tech savvy enough to solve a lot of problems themselves. So there isn't really a need for full-time tech for most composers. I mean, techs are also expensive to begin with, but there isn't really a reason. Like, you could hire someone to set things up for you once, but then after that, you don't really need someone all the time. Now, one of the problems here is, of course, that there's an increasing number of aspiring composers who want to be full-time assistants, but those positions are actually decreasing. Where you used to need 3 assistants, now you only need 1 to get the same amount of work done. Because so much of the process can now be automated, and it's only gonna get worse with AI tools coming up. I already mentioned printing stems, for example. I mean, Cubase now has all these batch functions where basically if your routing is good, you only have to press a button. The only reason why you still need to sit there is because you need to close the session and open the next session, select the tracks, and hit the button. But how hard is it going to be to create some AI assistant tool that can do that for you while you're asleep? A long-term problem that I've also discussed with colleagues that we might be facing, and this might be across industries as well as remote work becomes more popular, is that if you're not on the premises in a sort of office space with your colleagues, then how do you learn from them? This might become a big issue in a lot of areas going forward because a lot of aspiring professionals are not going to get the same on-the-job training that we got. There's something invaluable about being in the same building as your colleagues, being able to look over their shoulder, ask questions, really get to know them also on a personal level, you know, really network properly and not superficially, getting recommended by those colleagues over time to work at other places as well, or generally just getting a foot in the door. Like, it's so much harder to have your team grow with you as well. If I change something in my template, then that doesn't automatically get translated to other people's templates. If you're an in-house assistant working from the same rig, then you can see all the changes that your boss is making. You can see how they improve. You can see how they grow and how they do things. When I learn something new, my other team members don't learn that same thing because they're not on my rig, in my template. If I'm learning new mixing techniques, they don't automatically learn that either. If I use different sample libraries all of a sudden, they don't know that. Nothing really translates unless you go through the trouble of really cloning the setup. I think talking to executives and also composer colleagues, it feels like the entire industry is in a reset right now, which is unfortunate for those just starting out and trying to get a foot in the door. I mean, the guilds and unions are saying that even among their veterans, only 20%, I think they said last time, were working. And they were actually warning aspiring people across departments. They were warning them not to come here at the moment because there's nothing for them here. And I don't really know what to tell aspiring composers either that are coming here right now, because I'm like, it's such a different environment now than it was when I started out. And the past 2 years have been particularly rough for this industry. I'm one of the few lucky ones that had consistent work and that has not been impacted by the video game layoffs, but so many of my friends and colleagues have been impacted by that. But anybody who's been here for 20, 30 years and has been consistently working in the industry is saying it's never, ever been this bad before. And maybe this will result in indie film studios and indie game developers popping up left and right. I certainly hope so. But right now it is so hard to get anything made, especially while the big guys are kind of struggling and also pausing. I'm not entirely sure what they're waiting for, but it seems like they're waiting out something here, probably the recession that we're in, that nobody wants to admit that we're in. Obviously, the cheap COVID money is gone. A lot of places had overhired, a lot of studios overproduced content and are just scaling back massively. Things are changing so much currently in the way that we do things and also in the way that we will be doing things going forward. So much so that a lot of people are actually leaving the industry now because they haven't been working since March last year, which is now, 1.5 years? And so they just can't sustain themselves anymore and wait this thing out, whatever this thing is. I do think it's safe to say that a lot of jobs will no longer exist or will only exist in limited numbers. The only good thing, of course, is whenever an industry changes so much, it does create new jobs, different jobs that previously did not exist. So I guess it's going to be a question of who can pivot into that new era, who can wait this thing out, and who, on the other hand, is going to get left behind, I suppose. Much like it happened in the early 2000s when the world went digital, which forced a lot of people out of being active in this industry because they just really wanted to stick to the old way of doing things, and they were essentially pushed out because they didn't adapt to the new way of doing things. Where am I going with this? I don't know. It's just something that's been on my mind because it's been weird here. I will say that. I mean, it's also been weird in the video game industry. It's been weird in the film and TV industry. You can feel it all over town because LA is built around the film and television industry very much. The entire infrastructure is built around this industry. And when that industry is hurting, a lot of adjacent industries are hurting as well. So it's been a strange atmosphere with all the layoffs or freelancers being out of work, even, established composers not really having anything to do, their teams being laid off or, just being put on leave, basically, their usual additional writers, not having anything to do, the orchestrators, music prep services not being busy. It's quite depressing to basically hear everybody say the same thing. Like, I remember someone from one of the music prep services said, it's not even been this bad during COVID. So I don't know. I don't know where we're going with this. It very much feels like the studios or this entire industry is trying to figure out how to adapt to the new times, how to implement smart technology, and figuring out who they're going to need in the future, who they're not going to need in the future, what kinds of new jobs are there, who needs to be trained for those new jobs. It just feels like everything is shifting right now, and nobody really knows what to do about it. Nobody really knows how to move forward. Nobody knows where we're going with this. So it's going to be interesting to see where we're going to come out, because something's happening, something's changing right now, and I hope it's going to be exciting when things pick up again and we figure out a new way of doing things. Because the way it has been over the past 5 to 10 years was not really sustainable to begin with. So something has to change. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I would love to hear from my colleagues as well. I would love to hear their thoughts on what's going on and what they think where we're going, because it's going to be interesting.